So I want to share with you a story that I wrote about a time Linda and I went to New York City. About 5 years ago, Linda and I were in New York City, and we were making our way somewhere between Penn Station and our walk along 6th Avenue, making our mile-and-a-half trek towards our hotel in Times Square. And suddenly the words came to me, "Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I want to be a part of it." You know the rest of it. And people were looking at me, and Linda quieted me, and I said, I love it here. The streets are just packed with people, and as we looked around, the streets were teeming with thousands, tens of thousands of people on city sidewalks, moving like clogged arteries, the veins plugging up at intersections and begging for a low cholesterol diet. Yellow cabs and small freight delivery trucks, city buses, and suspicious-looking SUVs with tinted windows, all jockeying dirty streets for a position to win the race to the next stoplight. There were people of every variety, every shape, color, ethnicity, and age. The sidewalk seemed to have an unspoken etiquette to it as well. I mean, if you could call it that, there seemed to be some rules for this concrete jungle that we began to notice. Pedestrians appeared to have one of three approaches to walking. The first approach was get your destination in mind and hunker down, one foot after the other, trying to keep pace with the crowd, avoid eye contact, looking up only to note the intersections. Then we noticed a second approach, which was grab your gear, your children, your loved ones, pray to God or any other deities, because obviously there were a lot of different religious varieties there, and suspect every creature in the path as an unfriendly. It's war out there. With every present occasional threat of an unwanted solicitation or an angry, impatient pedestrian behind you or heading straight for you, or the worst case of collisions is when a pedestrian suddenly stopped about 30 feet ahead of you to check their cell phone for a text or a GPS location, and it was suddenly you were in a 10-person pileup. The third pedestrian approach, while not the most expedient, seemed the most enjoyable and rewarding, which I'll simply call paying attention. Gary Zukav wrote about this approach, I think, in his book on quantum physics, The Dancing Wooly Masters, Chaos Theory and the Slow Waltz. I call it slow living. Those people effortlessly strolled along, noting landmarks, sidestepping head-ons with others. This slow dance seemed to be the primary engine behind the success of this approach and created a stress-free zone for those we noticed who were practicing it. So we tried it. We slowed down and immediately were hit behind from someone that looked like Jay Leno. I mean, we're pretty sure it was Jay Leno. He had that playful smile and that protruding jaw, and he said hi, and then he kept on moving. And while many simply rushed past this other character we noticed, Yoda, we stopped and saw this Jedi Master floating, stationary above the sidewalk, nothing beneath him. He saw us staring at him and subtly pointed down to his little box there, the donation box. And he said in his high-pitched, gravelly voice, "A particularly unsuccessful day I am having." So I dropped $1 in his box. And then suddenly his voice turned to a gruff, gravelly low pitch, and he said, "Yeah, thanks. I'm leaving. It's too hot out here." And then he got up, revealing the hidden plexiglass platform that he was sitting on that was attached to the steel staff and a steel platform that was blended in with the sidewalk. He got up and then he walked off in an uncharacteristically human fashion. My favorite character was a guy walking up and down the length of the street there, every block or two, and he was keeping time with the crowd, carrying a sign on the top of a 6-foot pole. We saw several of these guys over the next couple of days. His sign read, "Seek Jesus." Then while the guy would be walking, he was just walking along, checking out his phone, hardly paying attention to anyone around him. He would flip the sign around and it would say, "Repent and be free." No one seemed to be paying attention to him either way. Later that week, though, we saw another guy, and this time the guy was just standing in the same place as people passed him by, but had the same setup, a 6-foot pole with a sign on the top, and this sign read, "Seek Bob. He frees us." Well, people would walk up to him curious and start to ask him, "What's all that about?" And then he would flip the sign around, which said on the other side, "Just kidding, seek Jesus." But the reality of this chaos created a kind of mask that I noticed. Because there in the midst of Times Square, and nearby Wall Street, the financial district. In reality, it's such a mix of diversity and desire, as well as the obvious disparity and despair that seemed ignored as people passed left and right and back and forth. Later that same day, Linda looked at me and she said, "You know, somewhere out beyond all this towering concrete stands alone in the water the imposing figure of a lady holding out a torch into the unknown waters with these words inscribed where she stands." And she quoted, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest torn to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door."
Happy 4th of July. Hello, 1111 congregation in Fort Worth, Texas. My name is Kathy Crowley, and I'm from Dallas, Texas, but I'm not in Dallas now. I live and work in a little country in the Middle East called Oman, and have a very nice little villa right next to the sea. It's a sweet deal. I teach English here. So today, Tom McDermott, your minister, has asked me to tell you a story for your 4th of July celebration. So I will tell you a Joha story. Joha is the same as Hoja. They say that a long time ago, their neighbor kids are yelling. There were two villages, and they were not near the sea, they were near the mountains. And between those two villages, there was a beautiful well. One day, a woman approached the well to draw some water, and she saw an older woman there, a grandmother, a jidda. And she said, "Salam alaikum," which means peace be upon you. And the older woman replied, "Wa salam alaikum," which means, and may peace be upon you. And the younger woman said, "It's so nice of us to let you use our well. Your village must enjoy it very much." And the older woman said, "Oh, no, I have been around a long time, and this is our well, and we share it with you." So the younger woman said, "I don't think so." And the older woman said, "I am very sure." And that's where the fight started. So more people arrived and more people entered the debate, and soon it was completely out of control with loud voices and assertions, and finally they decided to call in the mayor of each village. Now the mayor is called a wali, and it happens, as often does in Oman, that both of the walis of each village, they were cousins. So they got together and they said, "Don't worry, we will discuss the matter, we will come back to you with a decision." So they did. And they weren't sure what to do. But when they came back with the decision, they told all the people, here's the situation. This big, beautiful well, all of the water on that side of the well belongs to that village. And all of the water on that side of the well belongs to that village. And the people said, okay, because they are a peace-loving Omani people. So they all were satisfied with that, and they all went home. But they say that every night at midnight, Joha, who is from that village, he goes to that side of the well and draws water out, carries it around to the other side, and pours it in the side of the well for his village because he loves his people. Now, some people will tell you, this is my water. This is my land. This is my earth, my air. But wise people know it belongs to all of us. Happy 4th of July, happy Independence Day, and happy Inter-Independence Day. Masalama.
So water is a powerful symbol for dependence all around the world. We all need it to survive, and in some places it's very hard to even come by. Water has always been this symbol of dependency. It seems ridiculous that two communities, as in Kathy's story, would actually be fighting over who gets it or who it belongs to. And yet we do that. We bottle it, we monetize it, we control it, we even dump in it. Until our relationship with what seems essential, like water, oftentimes becomes more transactional than natural. And the idea that Jesus would offer something to this woman at the well as a spiritual substitute instead of for something she truly physically needs seems a bit illogical. It seems a little ridiculous. But what he is doing is he is offering her a way of seeing all of life. Something at the very core of her being that if she tapped into that, it would affect the way in which she relates to everything. From the very well of her being. This is living water, he says. And she says, then I want to be free from this anxiety. I want to be free from this dependency on things. I want to be a part of that. We tend to think of independence as being something along the lines of being free of something or someone unpleasant or some difficult situation. Independence Day, this 4th of July day that we celebrate every year, we celebrate the declaration of our independence from the cruel and oppressive rule of King George 250 years ago, right? We understand that, and yet our freedom, as we have come to realize over the years and even more currently, has come and continues to come at the expense of the freedoms of others. Is that independence, or is that something else? Take a closer look at the root meaning of the word dependence, and you see its etymological roots are in the idea of being stretched out, hanging from some kind of burden, like an albatross around the neck. In truth, we think we live an independent life, but in reality, we're dependent on thousands of things. It's unavoidable. Stop breathing. Really, for example, stop breathing for a few seconds, for a dozen seconds. Maybe hold your breath for 30 seconds or a minute. After about a minute, people become pretty anxious when we're holding our breath. We feel the pressure building up in our veins and our head, and maybe after 2 minutes or 3 minutes, we're beginning to feel the real test of our limits. But most people cannot survive after 4 or 5 minutes of no air. If anything, our brain suffers irreparable damage. In truth, we are dependent on oxygen. Second by second, our lives require this oxygen, the plants that exhale it, the sun that drives the photosynthesis, and other stars that blow up billions of years ago to bring the next oxygen atom into our breath that we take. Or think about the people that you rely on. The touches, the compassion, the caring, the embrace, the medicines, the wisdom, teachings, the technologies, the civil behaviors. We depend on these things day in and day out. Thich Nhat Hanh calls this our interbeing with life. The thousands and thousands of people and plants that go into the very paper that I'm holding, the very technology that we're watching. It's our interbeing with things. In a sense, it's a little frightening to realize that our lives are dangled by thousands and thousands of threads that we depend on, many of which could be cut at any moment, which of course happened with this pandemic that we are now coming out of. We're all frail. We're all vulnerable. At times we're hurt by little things and hungry for love. When you let this in, though, maybe you're not so hard on yourself anymore. Maybe we look at others differently. Accepting dependence brings us into harmony with the way that life actually is. All things from gophers to galaxies arise and pass away in an interdependence with all other things. Hearing the voice of someone you love, eating a strawberry, taking a breath, realizing that your dependency brings you into an almost ecstatic gratitude when you suddenly accept the idea that 10,000 vulnerabilities are really 10,000 gifts. But then there's codependence. Codependence is a kind of dramatic, frustrating, stressful, even violent relationship or attachment to things or to people that we maintain for some unhealthy reason. Addictions, for example, and the people who continue to enable these addictions. That's a codependent relationship. Staying in an abusive relationship when we make the same kinds of self-destructive or self-sabotaging actions or choices with a lover, a friend, or at work. But I think nationalism, which often masks itself as a kind of celebration of independence and patriotism, these things I think actually can be said to be a kind of codependency. It's easy for an idea and its advocates to develop a kind of relationship that becomes less about independence and more about control. or personal satisfaction and a confirmation of a way of one's life. We want what we want, and for the people who are like us. The same can be said of religious extremism. It can be even said of liberal extremism. True independence is far more vulnerable, humble, even compassionate in its relationship with all of life. In a sense, true independence is more objective. In fact, the word freedom, its earliest roots carry the meaning of being in a state of love. So in a very real sense, to prevent independence from becoming an unhealthy codependence, which is what we more often see around us, we have to recognize, to be attentive to honor our interdependence with one another and all of life.
I stumbled across the idea of mindfulness about 6 years ago during the beginning of my spiritual journey. I first was introduced to the concept in a therapy session. I struggle with social anxiety, which basically means I have a hard time staying engaged and comfortable in social settings. My mind begins to negatively overprocess the actions of those around me. This causes me to panic and become withdrawn. My therapist suggested that instead of allowing my mind to pump out these negative scenarios and doubts, that I should simply observe myself and document my behaviors as if I was conducting a scientific study. She said life is all one big experiment anyway, so why not try to find out how you best operate in this existence? I began to notice my heartbeat. As I would become anxious, I noticed the way my mouth would get dry as I second-guessed something I was about to say. I felt the butterflies in my stomach as I felt people's eyes glance my way. Rather than hyperfixate on these sensations and criticize myself, I began removing the inner dialogue. I started acknowledging these sensations. I would gently say, "I see you. Thank you for alerting me." This simple practice launched me into a passionate season of self-evaluation. Mindfulness is essentially the act of becoming aware of one's physical, mental, and spiritual self. It is a sort of inner awakening. When one practices mindfulness, they begin to accept the existence of all feelings without giving them a negative or positive label. They validate all thoughts and ideas, allowing them to simply exist. As time went on, I began to see that if I could surface and separate myself from the loud biological responses, I was okay at all times. I was in control of me and I was safe with myself. Once I stepped outside of self, I found freedom. I began to see others more clearly. They were no longer a threat. They were just like me, endless entities learning to live. Over the years, mindfulness has helped me grasp the importance of perspective. I realized that based on individual experience, everyone was right, and everyone's views were valid. I understood that who I believed myself to be and who others experienced me to be would be two completely different entities, and vice versa. I began to see people as beautiful beings to be discovered and experienced rather than finding faults, casting judgments, and criticizing someone's private decisions. Mindfulness taught me the importance of gathering with others and listening intently. Listening with the desire to learn. Hearing about others' experiences allowed me to learn more about my own, allowed me to feel more comfortable in my faults and find peace in my shortcomings, as I learned that there was no perfect way to exist. Everyone grows and develops at their own pace. Each person's path in life is unique and yet normal, as we all must live. Life itself is a collective experience of all people. Without each other, the world that we know would cease to exist, as it was all born from the ideas of those who came before us, and will persist through the dreams of those who come after us. The unique perspective of a person does not invalidate the perspective of another. It actually enforces the idea that nothing is as it appears to be. This makes room for conversation and discovery that leads to the overall progression of a community. These realizations provided me with a new energy and vigor to truly live my life, as I was the only one who was going to experience it, and it allowed me to make room for those around me to live freely and authentically, to find what serves them as I find what serves me.
So let me share with you just a couple of quotes and a final poem before we have our singer Vizi from Dallas joining us with this amazing John Baptiste song. Martin Luther King said, "Whatever affects one directly affects all of us indirectly." I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Jesus said it this way, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Make yourself at home in this love so that as you love outwardly, you will experience the depth of this love inwardly." That's what the kingdom of God can look like. That's what the kingdom looks like when we live into that invitation. There's life and death, there's broken and fixed, there's yes, there's suffering, there's no, there's joy. There are Republicans and Democrats who don't see anything else but right and left. Yes, sure, but it's all holy. The living water runs through it all. And the invitation is to live as if we are in the midst of it. So let these last words, this poem, be our sort of prayer. You'll recognize some of the words. We're a mother's bread, instant potatoes, milk at the checkout line. We're her 3 children pleading for bubblegum and their father. We're the 3 minutes that she steals from a tabloid, needing to grasp this idea that even stars are as joyful and as bruised as she is. We're her second job, serving an executive at a table who's absorbed in his Wall Street Journal in a sidewalk cafe in New York City, shadowed by the skyscrapers. We're the shadows of the fortune he won and the family he lost. We're his loss and the lost. We're a father in a coal town who can't mine a life anymore because too much and too little has happened for too long. We're the grit of its main street's blackened out windows and the graffitied truths on the walls. We're a street in another town lined with royal palms at home with a Peace Corps couple who collect African art. We're their dinner party talk of wines, wielded picket signs and burnt draft cards. We're what they know, that it's time to do more than read the New York Times or buy locally sourced coffee and organic corn. We're the farmer who grew the corn, who plows his couch as worn as his back. By the end of the day, he sits in his couch and we're the TV set blaring news, having everything and nothing to do with the field dust in his eyes or his son nestled in his aching arms. We are his son. We're a black teenager who drove too fast or too slow, talked too much or too little, moved too quickly or not quick enough. We're the blast of the bullet leaving the gun. We're the guilt and the grief the cop feels who wished he had not shot. We're the dead. We're the living, amid the flicker of the vigil of the candlelight. We're in a dim cell with an inmate reading Dostoevsky. We're his crime, his sentence, his amends. We're the mending of ourselves and others. We're a Buddhist serving at a soup line beside a stockbroker. We're each other's shelter and hope, a widow's 50 cents that she drops in a collection plate, and the golfer's $10,000 offering for a cure. And yet, we're the cure for hatred caused by despair. We're the good morning of a bus driver who remembers our name, the tattooed man who gives up his seat on the subway. We're every door held open with a smile when we look into each other's eyes, the way that we behold the moon. We're the moon. We're the promise of one people, one breath, declaring to one another, I see you, I am a part of it. And I need you.